phone rang at 2047 in the morning. I know the exact time because I've been staring at the digital clock on my nightstand for about an hour before that. The way you do when you're 71 and your bladder won't let you sleep through the night anymore. I almost didn't answer. 3 rings, 4. I figured it was one of those scam calls from somebody pretending to be the CRA, or worse, somebody pretending to be my grandson, stuck in a Mexican jail asking for bail money. We get a lot of those out here in Kingston. But something made me pick up. Maybe it was the second sense you develop after 34 years on the bench. You learn to feel trouble before it arrives. Grandpa. The voice was so small it took me a second to recognize it. Grandpa, please. I'm scared. It was my granddaughter, Maddie, 12 years old. She was crying so hard I could barely make out what she was saying, and behind her voice I could hear the buzz of fluorescent lights and somebody on a radio, and the particular kind of echo you only get inside a police detachment. I've spent enough of my life in those buildings to know the sound. Maddie, sweetheart, slow down. Where are you? The police station. The one on Division Street. They said I attacked her, Grandpa. They said I attacked her with a kitchen knife, but I didn't. I swear to God I didn't. She came at me first, and Dad won't even talk to me. He just keeps shaking his head, and the officer says I'm going to have to stay here, and I can't. Grandpa, I can't. Please come get me. I was already pulling my pants on over my pajamas. My hands were shaking, which they don't usually do anymore, not even when I'm signing my name. My wife Eleanor passed 3 years ago this November, and I've lived alone since, so there was nobody to ask where I was going. But I caught myself in the hallway mirror anyway, and I didn't recognize the man looking back. Pale. Old. Afraid. Maddie. Listen to me. Don't say another word to anyone. Not one word. Do you understand? Not to the officers, not to your father, not to her. You ask for your grandfather and you wait. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I made it in 15. There's not much traffic on the 401 at 3 in the morning, even less on the side streets coming into downtown Kingston. The snow was coming down in those big lazy flakes that look pretty in the headlights and don't stick to the road, and the whole city had that hushed feeling it gets in the middle of a January night, like the buildings themselves are asleep. The duty sergeant looked up when I came through the front doors, and I watched the color drain out of his face. He was maybe 45. I didn't know him personally, but I could tell by the way his hand stopped halfway to his coffee that he knew who I was. Justice Whitcomb, he said. He swallowed. Sir, we weren't expecting. Where is my granddaughter? She's in interview room 2 with her father and her stepmother. Constable Pelletier is taking the statement. Her stepmother is in there. Yes, sir. With the alleged victim and the alleged perpetrator in the same room. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I could see on his face that he knew exactly how wrong that was, and I could see something else too, which is the look a man gets when he realizes the floor has just dropped out from under him professionally. Take me to her. Now. He stood up so fast, he knocked over his coffee. I didn't wait for him to clean it up. I knew where interview room 2 was. I'd sat in dozens just like it over the years, watching the other side of the glass. When I pushed open the door, the first thing I saw was Maddie. She was sitting in one of those molded plastic chairs with her knees pulled up to her chest, and her bottom lip was split open and crusted with dried blood, and there was a bruise coming up dark on the side of her jaw, and her left eye was swelling shut. She was wearing pink pajamas with cartoon polar bears on them. Pink polar bear pajamas with a busted lip, sitting in a police interview room being questioned for attempted assault. The second thing I saw was the woman my son had married 18 months earlier. Vanessa. She was sitting across the table with a thin bandage taped to her forearm and an ice pack on the back of her head, and her makeup was perfect. That's the detail I want you to hold on to. It was 3002 in the morning, and her makeup was perfect. Mascara, lipstick, contour, like she'd done her face before she'd called 911. And the third thing I saw was my son. My only son, Andrew, sitting beside Vanessa with his hand on her knee. He didn't look at his daughter when I came in. He looked at me, and then he looked at the floor. Out, I said. To Vanessa. To the constable. Everybody out. Now, the constable, a young woman maybe 26 with her hair in a tight French braid, opened her mouth to object. Then she got a good look at me, and at the sergeant standing behind me, and she closed her mouth. Sir, the suspect is 12 years old. She is the alleged victim of an assault. She has not been read her rights. She has not been offered legal counsel, and you are conducting an interrogation in the presence of her alleged attacker. I served on the Ontario Superior Court for 34 years, and I am about to make this the worst night of your entire career unless you walk out that door in the next 5 seconds. She walked out. Vanessa walked out, slow, hips swinging, giving me the kind of look you give somebody you've already decided you've beaten. Andrew started to walk out too, and I caught his arm. Not you, you stay. When the door closed, I sat down across from Maddie. Slowly, like you approach a hurt animal. I'd seen children sitting like she was sitting more times than I can count, and every single time it had broken something small in me, and I'd thought at least it isn't mine. Now it was mine. Sweetheart, I said, tell me what happened. She told me. It came out in pieces, between hiccups. Vanessa had been on her for weeks. Months, really. Telling her she was fat, telling her she was stupid, telling her she was the reason Andrew was unhappy, telling her she'd ruined Vanessa's life, pinching the soft part of her upper arm hard enough to leave fingerprint bruises she'd had to hide under long sleeves all through Christmas at my place, and I hadn't noticed. I'd sat across from her at my own dinner table on Boxing Day and asked her about school and not noticed that my granddaughter was wearing a turtleneck in a house I keep at 22 degrees. That night, Vanessa had come into her room around midnight. Maddie had been on her phone, texting a friend in Ottawa. Vanessa had taken the phone, had read the messages, and had found one where Maddie had told her friend that she wanted to come live with me. Vanessa had hit her. Maddie had tried to get away, had run downstairs into the kitchen, had grabbed a knife off the counter not to use it, but because she didn't know what else to do. And Vanessa had come at her, and somewhere in the struggle Vanessa had got cut on the forearm. A shallow slice. Then Vanessa had taken the knife away and hit her in the face with the handle. 3 times. While screaming the whole time, loud enough that the neighbors would hear. Maddie, stop! Maddie, why are you doing this? Then she'd called 911, and when the police arrived, she'd told them my granddaughter had attacked her unprovoked. I looked at my son. I looked at Andrew. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad, he said, she has bruises on her arm. There's blood on the knife, the neighbors heard her screaming. Andrew, Vanessa is terrified of her dad. She's been telling me Maddie's been acting out. She's been threatening. She's been... Andrew, look at me. He looked at me. And I want to tell you something about my son. He's a good man, in most of the ways men are supposed to be good. He works hard. He pays his taxes. He coached his daughter's hockey team for 4 years. After his first wife, Maddie's mother died of ovarian cancer when Maddie was 8. He spent 3 years not dating anybody. Then he met Vanessa at a charity auction at the Frontenac Club, and within 6 months he'd married her, and within a year he was a stranger. Andrew, that is your daughter. That is your child. Look at her face. Look at it. Dad, look at her face. Look at it. Dad, look at her face, Andrew. He looked for half a second, then he looked away. Vanessa says she did that to herself, to frame her. That was the moment. That was the exact moment. Sitting in that fluorescent-lit room with the smell of bad coffee and floor wax in my nose, that I understood I was not going to be able to fix this through my son. He was lost. Whatever Vanessa had done to him, whatever combination of sex and gaslighting and isolation she had used, she had gotten there before me and she had been thorough. Get out, I said. Dad, Andrew, I want you to leave this building. I want you to go home with your wife, and I want you to think very, very carefully between now and tomorrow morning about which side of this you are going to be standing on when it is finished, because it is going to be finished. I am going to finish it, and I will only ask you one time which side you choose." He stood up. He left. He didn't say goodbye to his daughter. I sat with Maddie until they let me take her home with me on temporary custody, which took about 4 hours and required me to call in a favor from a judge I'd mentored 20 years ago. By the time I got her back to my house in Kingston West, the sun was coming up over Lake Ontario, that thin gray winter sun that doesn't warm anything, and Maddie had fallen asleep in the passenger seat with her swollen face pressed against the cold window. I carried her inside. She's 12 and she's almost as tall as her grandmother was, but she felt light. I put her in the guest room, which Eleanor had decorated for the grandchildren 10 years ago with paint colors called Robin's Egg and Cloud Whisper, and I closed the door, and I went downstairs to the kitchen, and I sat at the table and I cried for about 10 minutes. Then I made coffee. Then I started making phone calls. The first call was to a Crown attorney named Margaret, who I'd known since she was a third-year law student. She owed me her career, frankly, and she said so the moment she recognized my voice. I told her what I needed. She said she'd start that morning. The second call was to an old friend who'd retired from the OPP and now did private investigation work, specifically the kind involving family court and abusive partners. His name was Ross. He didn't ask questions. He asked for an address and a name and a retainer, and I gave him all three. The third call I had to wait on until 9. It was to Maddie's school principal. I told her my granddaughter wouldn't be in for a few days, and that I needed copies of every photograph the school had taken of her over the last 6 months. Field trip photos, class photos, anything. The principal, a sharp woman in her 50s, who had taught Maddie's mother 25 years earlier, didn't ask why. She sent them by email within the hour. That was the first piece of the rope. The photos. In September, before Vanessa, Maddie had been a girl who smiled with her teeth showing. By the December concert, she was smiling with her lips closed. By the January class photo, she wasn't smiling at all, and she was wearing long sleeves under her school polo shirt. You could see the timeline in her face. You could see a timeline in her face. You could see a child being slowly extinguished. Ross called me back 2 days later. He'd been digging into Vanessa's background, and what he had found made me sit down on the 3rd step of my own staircase and put my head in my hands. Vanessa had been married before. Andrew knew about that. What Andrew didn't know was that she'd had a son from that first marriage, a boy named Jacob. He had died at the age of 7, 11 years before she met my son, in what had been ruled an accidental drowning in a bathtub at the family home in Sherbrooke. The investigating officers had had concerns. There had been bruising. There had been an interview with a teacher who said the child had been afraid to go home, but the case had been closed inside 6 weeks. And Vanessa had collected $340,000 from a life insurance policy she had taken out on her son 60 days before his death. And she had moved to Toronto, and then she had moved to Kingston. And then she had met my boy. I want you to understand what this felt like. I want you to understand it because if you have grandchildren, or if you love a child, or if you have ever loved anyone at all, I want you to feel it for 1 second, the way I felt it sitting on that staircase. She had killed her own son for money, and 11 years later she was working on my granddaughter. I called Margaret back. I told her what Ross had found. I asked her if there was any way to get the Sherbrooke file reopened, and she said it would take time, but it was possible, and I told her time was the one thing we had, because Maddie was safe with me, and we were going to make absolutely sure she stayed that way. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. Vanessa filed a counterpetition for custody, claiming I was a controlling old man who had alienated her stepdaughter from her father, and Andrew signed an affidavit supporting her. He signed it. My son signed an affidavit that said my granddaughter was a danger to herself and to others and should be returned to the family home. I read it sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in front of me. And I think that was the moment I stopped being his father in any way that mattered. I didn't stop loving him. but I stopped being able to see him as anything other than what he had become, which was a man so afraid of losing the woman in his bed that he was willing to feed his child to her. Maddie, in the meantime, was healing. Slowly. The bruises faded in a week. The other things took longer. She wouldn't sleep with the door closed. She wouldn't eat unless I sat with her. She apologized for things she didn't need to apologize for, the way abused children do. For using too much hot water in the shower, for asking for a glass of milk, for taking up space. I let her cry. I let her sit in Eleanor's old reading chair by the window and look out at the frozen lake. I made her grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup the way her grandmother used to, and, on the third night, she crawled into the chair beside me on the couch where I was watching a Senators game I wasn't paying attention to, and she put her head on my shoulder and she said, "I knew you'd come, Grandpa. I knew you'd come." I didn't say anything. I just put my arm around her. There are some things you don't put into words because the words aren't large enough. The hearing was on a Tuesday morning in late February. Vanessa wore a gray wool dress with a white collar that made her look like a Sunday school teacher. Andrew sat beside her, in a suit I had bought him for his first job interview after law school. Maddie sat between me and Margaret in the front row of the gallery, in a navy dress and tights, and she did not look at her father or her stepmother once. The crown went first. Margaret laid out the case carefully, the way she always does, building one piece on top of another. The medical examination of Maddie's injuries, which were entirely inconsistent with a single struggle and entirely consistent with sustained physical abuse. The text messages on Maddie's phone, which Vanessa had not realized were backed up to a cloud service her stepdaughter had set up at school. The witness statements from 2 teachers and a school counselor who had been documenting concerns since October. The photographs from the school year, and then Margaret introduced the Sherbrooke evidence. I have spent my whole adult life in courtrooms. I have seen verdicts come down on every kind of person you can think of, but I have never, in 50 years, seen a room go as quiet as that courtroom went when Margaret put up the photograph of 7-year-old Jacob on the projector screen, smiling in a hockey jersey 2 months before he drowned in 3 inches of bathwater. Vanessa's lawyer objected. He was overruled. Margaret kept going. The insurance policy, the bruising on the previous body, the interview with the teacher in Sherbrooke, the reopened investigation, now 16 days old, and the statement from a detective in the Sûreté du Québec that fresh charges were being prepared. I watched my son's face during all of it. I watched the color leave him by degrees, the way the light leaves a winter sky. By the time Margaret was done, Andrew was looking at his wife the way you look at a stranger on the bus who has just started speaking in tongues. He understood, finally. He understood that he had married a woman who had murdered her own child, and that he had handed her his daughter, and that the only reason his daughter was still alive was that an old man had answered a phone call at 3 a.m. The judge issued a permanent custody order in my favor. Vanessa was remanded into custody, pending the Quebec charges. She was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. She didn't look at Andrew. She didn't look at Andrew. Whatever was inside her, the part of her that was a person, had gone somewhere a long time ago, and what was left was just the shape of a woman. Andrew waited for me in the hallway. He was crying. He tried to take my arm, and I stepped back from him gently but firmly, and I shook my head. Dad, please, I didn't know. You didn't want to know, Andrew. There's a difference. Dad, I asked you in the police station that night which side you were going to stand on. You made your choice. I'm not your judge. I'm your father, and I love you, and I will love you until the day I die. But Maddie is going to live with me now, and she is going to heal, and when she's ready, if she's ever ready, she will decide what kind of relationship she wants to have with you. That decision is hers, not yours, not mine. Hers. He sank down onto one of those wooden benches they have in the courthouse hallways. He put his face in his hands. He cried like he was 8 years old again, the year his mother and I lost our second baby at 6 months, and he had come into our bedroom and crawled into the bed between us and asked if we were going to keep him. I left him there. I took my granddaughter home. That was almost 3 years ago now. Maddie is 15. She's in grade 10 at Frontenac Secondary School. She got an 88 in English last term, and a 92 in history, and a 74 in math, which we are working on. She plays goalie for a school's hockey team. She has a best friend named Annika, and they spend hours in Maddie's bedroom doing things to each other's hair and laughing at videos on their phones. She has not seen her father since the hearing. She has not asked to. Vanessa was convicted in Quebec 18 months ago. She is currently serving a sentence of 25 years without eligibility for parole in a federal institution near Joliet. The Sherbrooke case was reopened on the basis of new forensic evidence, and what could not be proved in 2013 could be proved in 2024, because science gets better and old bones tell new stories. She will be 68 when she is eligible for release. She will not see another summer outside that building until she is very old, and she will deserve every cold January she spends inside it. Andrew has written to me twice. Both times I read the letters, and both times I put them in the drawer of the writing desk in my office, and I did not write back. Maddie does not know about the letters. When she is older, and when she asks, I will tell her, and she can decide what to do with them. They are not my letters to answer. I will tell you the lesson I learned, and then I'll stop, because I'm an old man and I've talked enough. The lesson is this. I spent 34 years on the bench. I sentenced murderers. I terminated parental rights. I sent men to prison who never came out. I was, by any reasonable definition, a powerful person, in a powerful job, in a country that takes the rule of law seriously. And on the night my granddaughter needed me, the only reason I was able to help her was that I had been all of those things, and I knew the right people, and I knew which doors to push on and which favors to call in. What about the children who don't have a grandfather like me? That's the question I cannot stop asking myself. The Maddies in Sudbury and St. John and Red Deer whose grandparents are dead or far away or never had any power in the first place. The Maddies who call somebody at 3 a.m. and get nobody. The Maddies whose phones get taken away before they ever get the chance to call. It should not require a retired Superior Court justice to save a 12-year-old girl from her stepmother. The fact that it did, in my granddaughter's case, is not a triumph. It's an indictment. Of all of us, of how we listen to children, and of how we don't. So I'll say one thing to you, and then I'll go make my granddaughter her breakfast, because she's home from school today with a cold, and she likes scrambled eggs with cheddar the way her grandmother used to make them. If a child tells you they are scared, believe them. The first time, not the second time, not the third time, not after the bruises show. The first time. That is the entire job. That is the only job. And if you do it, you might be the person they remember at 3 a.m, 50 years from now when they're the old one telling the story. Believe them. Please. Just believe them. I've thought a great deal about cause and effect since that January night. About the small choices that bend a life into a shape it was never meant to take. Andrew did not wake up one morning and decide to abandon his daughter. He decided instead 100 smaller things. He decided not to ask why Maddie wore a turtleneck on Boxing Day. He decided not to notice that her laugh had gone quiet. He decided every single time Vanessa told him a story about his child to believe the woman in his bed instead of the girl in the next room. Each of those choices was small. Together they became the affidavit he signed against his own blood. That is how character works, I think. Not in the grand moments, but in the quiet ones. That night I drove to the station. I was not being brave. I was being who I had spent 71 years becoming. A man who answers the phone. A man who believes a child the first time she speaks. The training was already done. The night just asked me to use it. I want to say something honest about the 3 things I have come to believe matter most, now that I am old enough to know I will not have time to be wrong about much else. The first is decency. Plain, unglamorous decency. The willingness to be inconvenienced by another person's pain. Vanessa lacked it entirely, and that absence is what allowed her to do what she did to Jacob and what she tried to do to Maddie. The second is the discipline of thinking clearly when your heart is loud. Standing in that interview room, looking at my granddaughter's split lip, the easiest thing in the world would have been to scream. I did not scream. I asked the right questions in the right order, because somewhere along the way I had taught myself that rage without strategy is just noise, and noise does not save children. The third is endurance, the willingness to keep going when the case takes weeks, when your son signs a paper against you, when the woman you are trying to put behind bars has a good lawyer and a perfect face. Most evil in this world is not defeated by a single brave moment. It is defeated by an old man who refuses to be tired on a Tuesday in February in a courtroom in Kingston. Maddie is upstairs right now doing homework she keeps complaining about. She is becoming someone. I do not know yet who. I know she will be kind because she has decided to be, which is the only way anyone is ever kind. I know she will be careful with the people she loves because she has learned what carelessness costs. And I know she will answer the phone 50 years from now when somebody she has never met needs her to. That is the part that matters. The chain does not break with us. It just gets handed forward. If you take one thing from an old man's story, take this. Be the person somebody can call